Welcome back, everyone! Last time we learned about permutations, the symmetric group, and the definition of a permutation puzzle. We defined a permutation puzzle to be a set of ordered elements which you can rearrange according to some given rules. At the end of the video, we saw that sometimes there is an arrangement of the elements which cannot be reached using legal puzzle moves. We call these impossible arrangements. In this video, we will apply what we learned last time to determine the impossible arrangements of the Rubik's Cube. Let's get started. To start, let's take a closer look at how the Rubik's Cube pieces move. See that no matter how we turn the cube, the centers remain fixed. Corners go to corners, and edges go to edges. Suppose that we wanted to encode the information for any given arrangement in an easy way. As long as we fix a position in space for the cube, we don't have to include any information on the center squares, since those remain fixed. Since corners always go to corners, we will give them their own numbering system and name them 1 through 8. For the 12 edges, we'll name them with letters A through L. Now, any given arrangement of the cube will have 2 permutations attached to it, one for the corner pieces and one for the edge pieces. The corner permutation, which we will call alpha, will be an S8, the symmetric group on 8 elements. And the edge permutation, which we will call beta, will be an S12, the symmetric group on 12 elements. But see that these 2 pieces of information don't completely define the arrangement of the cube. For instance, these 2 arrangements are different, but the corner and edge pieces are all in the same spots. The difference is in the orientation of these corner pieces. So our notation for an arrangement of the cube has to include information on the orientation of the pieces as well as their positioning. This information is a little harder to encode, but you can imagine a skin all the way around the cube. As we perform cube moves, the skin stays in the same place, even though the squares of the cube change places. For each cube piece, we will put a plus sign above one of its faces on the skin. For an edge piece, we'll put a 0 on the face underneath the plus sign and a 1 on the other face. For a corner piece, we'll put a 0 under the plus sign and then number the other faces 1 and 2 in counterclockwise order. As we perform the cube moves, the plus signs will stay in the same place in space and the numbers will move with the cube pieces. Then, for any arrangement of the cube, we will make a list of the number under the plus for each cube piece. We will make one list for the corner pieces and one list for the edge pieces. All of the entries in the corner list will be 0s, 1s, and 2s, and all of the entries in the edge list will be 0s and 1s. We will label these lists VC and VE because we will think of them as orientation vectors. But if the word vector scares you, you can just think of them as lists. Note that this is a pretty detailed idea, and one which is not well suited for video presentation. So if you're interested in understanding this construction completely, I suggest that you reference the book I've linked down below. For our purposes though, we can accept that there is a way to record the orientation of each piece on the cube. To recap, for any given arrangement of the cube, we may have permuted corners, permuted edges, rotated corners, or flipped edges. To write down a specific arrangement, we encode each of these 4 possibilities in one piece of information: the alpha, beta, VC, and VE. So it takes 4 pieces of information to completely encode the arrangement of our cube. Let's look at an example. What is the information that we need to record for the arrangement given by this cube move? To think this through, we will represent the cube with this picture a kind of bird's eye view. First, let's think about the permutation of the corners. We will label them 1 through 8 in the same way as we did earlier. Then our cube corresponds to this cycle in the picture. So the corner permutation alpha is given by the cycle 1, 5, 6, 2. Now we can think about the permutation of the edges. We will label them A through L, as we did before. Again, our cube move corresponds to this cycle in the picture. Then the edge permutation beta is given by the cycle B, E, J, F. Now, let's think about orientation. Remember that we have one list of 8 entries for the corners, VC, and one list of 12 entries for the edges, VE. The lists follow the same order as the numbering of the corner and edge pieces. So the first entry in VC is the number under the plus for corner 1, and the first entry in VE is the number under the plus for edge A. I made these lists by just thinking through the number which will be under the plus sign after the cube move. It definitely helps to have a physical cube in your hand for this one. Go ahead and check out the book linked below if you want to learn more details on this step. Now, see that we have 4 pieces of information: alpha, beta, VC, and VE. All together, these completely define the arrangement of the cube. Finally, we have all of the information we need to figure out what makes an arrangement possible or impossible on the Rubik's Cube. We know that all arrangements of the cube can be achieved by performing the 6 face twists in any order. So we just need to see what properties of the identity permutation are unchanged by any of these face moves. Let's start by looking at the permutation of the corners and edges, and not worry about their orientation for right now. We will draw the same picture of the cube as we did earlier. Each of the cube moves corresponds to cycling one of the 6 quadrilaterals in this picture. Notice that for each of these moves, the permutation of the corners will be a cycle of length 4, and the permutation of the edges will also be a cycle of length 4. For instance, let's consider the permutation which corresponds with turning the top face of the cube clockwise. The corner permutation alpha will be 1, 4, 3, 2, and the edge permutation beta will be A, D, C, B. This means that for a single face move, the permutation of the corners and the permutation of the edges will both be odd. But if we do one face move and then another, the resulting product action will have an even permutation for the corners and an even permutation for the edges, since 2 odd permutations make an even permutation. Consider this red move that we just looked at, and then this other blue move. We will calculate the resulting corner and edge permutations if we do the red and then the blue. The red alpha is given by 1, 4, 3, 2, as we already saw. And the blue alpha is given by the cycle 1, 2, 6, 5. Using cycle multiplication, we have that the resulting permutation of the corners is given by 1, 4, 3, 6, 5. Next, the red beta is given by the cycle ADCB, as we have already seen. The blue beta is given by the cycle EBFJ. Using cycle multiplication, we have that the resulting permutation of the edges is ADCFJEB. Note that both the permutation of the corners and that of the edges are even permutations, because they are the product of 2 odd permutations. For every cube move, we have that the permutation of the corners and the edges are both odd. Since every arrangement of the cube can be broken down into cube moves, we conclude that the permutation of the corners and that of the edges will always have the same parity, or even or oddness. This brings us to the first part of the fundamental theorem of Cubology. Yes, this is a ridiculous name and I absolutely love it, and no, it's not mine. If a permutation of the cube is possible to reach with legal cube moves, then the permutation of the corners and the permutation of the edges must have the same parity. But, as we've seen, this is not the full story, because we also need to think about the orientation of these pieces as well. I won't go through all of the details here because orientation is slightly more tedious, but the principle is the same as what we did for permuting corners and edges. We look to see what properties of the identity permutation are unchanged under the face moves. Remember how we made one list of numbers underneath the plus signs for the corners and one list for the edges? Well, we can check one by one that for each face move, the sum of the corner list is congruent to 0 mod 3, and the sum of the edge list is congruent to 0 mod 2. These facts give two properties of a valid arrangement of the cube. First, there must be an even number of flipped edges. Second, the number of clockwise rotated corners and the number of counterclockwise rotated corners must be equal modulo 3. Again, if you're interested in getting all of the details on orientation, be sure to check out the book that I've linked down below. This brings us to the full statement of the fundamental theorem of cubology. A permutation of a 3x3x3 Rubik's Cube is possible to reach with valid cube moves if and only if, firstly, the permutation of the corners and the permutation of the edges have the same parity. Secondly, there are an even number of flipped edges. And thirdly, the number of clockwise rotated corners and the number of counterclockwise rotated corners are equal modulo 3. As a side note, you may notice that we only talked about one direction of this theorem, namely that every valid cube arrangement satisfies these properties. For the other direction, one would have to start with a cube arrangement satisfying these properties and then go backwards to argue that such an arrangement can be solved. To learn the details of this, go ahead and check out the book linked in the description. So now that we know that some cube arrangements are impossible, and we know why they are, I wonder if different impossible arrangements are the same type of impossible. That is, can we get from one impossible arrangement to another with legal cube moves? And if not, how many types of impossible arrangements are there? We will explore these and other questions in the next video. I hope you'll join me again. Thank you all for watching. Go and grab a cube and play around with some possible permutations. I'll see you next time, and as always, keep exploring.